Hello and welcome. We're so delighted that you can be here with us today. We're here at NYU at the downtown campus near Washington Square. My name is Robin Gershon, and I'll be your host today. Before we begin, we would like to first have a word of welcome from our Chief Administrator in our department, Dr. Eliseo Yar, who is a national treasure, even international, in his specialty in epidemiology. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Robin. I think National Treasure was the name of a movie, no? Or is that? That was Nicolas Cage. So thank you and welcome. And I'm delighted to share the Department of Epidemiology and the Global School of Public Health resources with you. And I know that you're all around the country and internationally, but I hope that if you are in New York City, you come and visit us. And I just want also to congratulate the organizers and to thank the organizers for using your this venue for this event, which is just fascinating and incredibly timely. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, we're going to get started with our first talk. If you could get the slides forwarded to me. We are there. Let me see. Okay, great. I'll be starting you off with our first talk, which is going to be results of a study that we conducted very recently. We're going to move pretty quickly because we want to save plenty of time for our panelists later on today. First, I would like to acknowledge our co-authors on the study. We have Brianna Viez, who's here in the room, Cameron Lindsay, Jan Garrett, who'll be joining us. She's probably here already. We have Jerry Davison in the room with us, all the way from South Carolina, and Devin Hawkins, who's our statistician. This work was funded by the NIDILRR. Please don't ask me to pronounce that. Okay, the rationale for this study. We know that disaster events are increasing and increasingly more severe and costly. We know in the last 5 years alone, we have had 115 disasters that have cost each of them more than $1 billion apiece. That's an average of 23 major billion-dollar disasters per year, just in the past 5 years. Anyone who thinks that we can deny climate change can just look at the numbers, because we have exceeded in these last 5 years over $2.5 trillion. Think about that for a minute, 2.5 trillion. We have a perfect storm that's forming. We have more than 1 in 4 adults. Water. Get me the water. Just need a little water. Taking some antihistamines for the end of my cold, and it's making me a little dry. Thank you so much. Let me just take a quick sip. More than 1 in 4 people in the US has 1 or more disabilities. This is the perfect storm. We have increasing disaster frequency and severity, and we have more and more people who are disabled, mainly because we have more and more people who are aging in the US. And this combination is that 2 to 4 times, people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or die during a natural disaster event. They are also much less likely to recover physically or financially. And studies have shown, including the studies that we've done, because this space has not been well studied at all, but we have shown, in spite of the fact that ADA coordinators are incredibly devoted and hardworking in the work that they do, they are unbelievably over subscribed and in demand. And both they and the studies we've done on the offices of emergency management tell us that both of these groups that might be helpful in disaster planning and response are simply not able to do it, or doing it in a very kind of marginal way. So this is a perfect storm for us, that we have this increasingly disabled, increasingly aging, increasing frequency and severity of disaster events, all combining to create a very large pool of people who are at incredible risk. And of course, there are very few studies about the disaster experience and preparedness for people with disabilities. And the few studies that are out there actually have been done by us and our team. So we're looking to do some more. And right now we're going to share with you the findings of our most recent study. I just wanted to put up this interesting graphic. It's interesting for me. It's a couple of years old, but even in this couple of years past, you can see a lot of regions have wildfire risk. I know people in Region 9 have been severely impacted, unbelievably adversely impacted by wildfires, including, other floods, heavy storms. But even here in New York City, we have had wildfires, even in Central Park last year, and very recently out in Long Island, in places we have never had wildfire events. And of course, we have increasing heat, extremes of weather, and the increasing heat, of course, is leading to this increase in wildfire, and across, that's happening all over the country. Okay, so now I can see our interpreters. Good to see you, Gage. Great to see you. Great to see all of you. Oops, I'm going back into my space. And okay, so we conducted a study in the late fall of 24. We only had Region 9, which of course is California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, Pacific Islands, and the 148 tribal nations. For the study, we decided to develop a very short 5-item, 5-question measure of preparedness to make it very simple, quickly to say, is somebody prepared or not, or someplace in the middle. So we had a 5-item measure. It simply had these items, these questions. Do you have an evacuation plan? Probably some of you out there, by the way, have taken this survey. And if you have, thank you so much in advance. The other question was, do you have backup for your powered equipment? Have you stockpiled your absolute necessities? Do you have a go bag ready? And have you contacted your local response agencies, such as fire, EMS, and the power companies? And this is what we found. We had a larger sample than this, but we decided to limit this analysis just to those people who answered those 5 questions. So of all the people who were in the sample, who got the study, 127 people answered it. By far, we had more women. 62% were over the age of 51 and older. 38% were between 18 and 50. Household income, we had 34% who earned as a household less than $30,000 a year, and 66% had more than $31,000 a year. We had actually a pretty wide range, including a whole bunch of people who had more than $100,000 a year. A large proportion, 26%, live alone. And I've seen recent data about older people in America and what proportion live alone. And right now it's over 70% of people over 65 live alone. So this number, when I first saw it, looked a little high, but then I saw the numbers about aging Americans, and I realized we're increasingly having people who just live alone, especially as they age. We had everyone in our sample. The starting question was, do you have a disability? And then what type? And in our sample, everyone has at least one, but many of them had more than 3. And those disabilities also included chronic illnesses. So of the sample that had taken the survey, 35%, so more than a third, had experienced a major disaster event in the past 5 years. 27% of these individuals had been injured in the event. 40% suffered a financial loss. 82% said that they had sheltered in place. Another 40%, because remember, they could have had more than one event they had experienced. 47% had to be evacuated. And interestingly, if they had to be evacuated, only half had had their needs met during the evacuation. Half felt that they were prepared, which seems like a pretty high proportion to me. And I wonder how many of you out there, if somebody were to ask you, do you feel prepared for a major disaster event? How many of you would say, yes, I do? And then, of course, a large proportion, interestingly, felt that their preparedness in general helped them to get through COVID. And many people in our sample reported that, in fact, they had had COVID many more than once. So these are the answers to our little measure that is now available to anyone who'd like to use it in their state, in their organization, in any which way they'd like to do it. In fact, the entire survey is available to you. All of the results are available to you. And we're happy to share every single thing that we have. And this is what we found out. A fairly large proportion, I would say 58%, do have an evacuation plan. If you ask people in New York City, do you have an evacuation plan? I can ask the people right here in the room, how many people in the room, just raise your hand, feel that you have an evacuation plan? That is, where are you going to go if you had to leave your apartment? Where would you go? And most importantly, do you know where there's a shelter? How many of you would say yes? Only one person in the room said yes. And of course, she is a disaster researcher, so she has to say yes. But she probably does know the answer. The backup powered equipment, this was concerning. Of the people who said they needed to use it, only 40% actually had any kind of backup. We have heard of a lot of very bad outcomes when people do use either oxygen or powered equipment of any kind, and they lose power, they don't have a generator. It's very serious. Stockpiles were pretty good. 60% did have stockpiles, and 50%, half of them had a go bag ready. How many people here in the room have a go bag ready? Nobody. Including me, because we don't have room in New York City apartments to even have a go bag. And this is concerning. Only 25% who needed to had made contact with their local response agencies to let them know that, in fact, here I am, I have this kind of disability, I might need this kind of help. And that is, of course, concerning. Okay, so just very quickly, the associations between our quick and simple little 5-question measure of preparedness, we found this relationship, these relationships. Older people were more prepared. And there's data out there that shows that sometimes in some studies, older people are not more prepared. Other studies have shown that they are. I've seen it both ways. I'd be interested to see what our colleague Alexis Merjanoff thinks about that, because she does do a lot of studies with older people. I think that the people who had past disaster experience, it's not a surprise to me that they would be more prepared. And I think there's other data out there that indicates if you've been through an experience like that, you tend to learn from that experience and get more prepared. Being seriously injured or infected, for instance, from COVID, that made people that had an association with a higher score in that measure. Suffering any kind of financial loss led to them being more prepared or thinking they're more prepared. Having to evacuate or shelter in place also was associated with higher scores on the preparedness measure. And this was interesting. This perception or feeling prepared was also correlated or associated with having a higher score. And having made backup plans for a caregiver, and there were a lot of people who did not make backup plans for the caregiver. We've seen this in study after study. A lot of people don't make their plans with their caregiver, or they don't trust the caregiver will be with them, or for any number of reasons, and all of them quite serious. So, but in this case, if they have made plans, backup plans for their caregiver, they were more likely to have a higher score on the preparedness little measure. And this is probably the most important thing that we can change. We can help them to create backup plans for caregiver. This is what we call an interventional possibility here. Many of these things we cannot do much intervention on except in terms of education, right? But this helping people to get backup planning with their caregiver or for the caregiver, we can help with. I'm sure that Jerry Davison, who's here with us in the room, she probably has a lot of ideas about that. And past participation in an emergency drill was associated with having a better score. And that's certainly something that we, as public health practitioners here at NYU and people who are associated with ADA centers. All of those people can certainly help people get involved in emergency drills. And then I just put this as our last slide. We have a timekeeper here in the room, and she'll be letting me how we're doing. How are we doing with the time? She's giving me an indication now. So in their own words, and you can read it yourself, but what were they thinking? We had a lot of what we call open-ended items, and people were putting in their personal thoughts and, their words of wisdom, because one of the questions at the very end was, what advice would they like to share? And I really loved reading that. And at one point, our wonderful students who are here, and I'll introduce them in a minute, they will be writing this up as a publication, because these are words, wisdom words that really need to be shared. But here, the things they were concerned about is, or thinking is, it's not going to happen. You're on your own. There's only so much I could do. I don't know who to ask for help. On the other hand, the advice they want to share is make a plan for transportation, that's for sure. Sign up for alerts, work with your local ILCs, ask for and accept help. And I love this one, culture of preparedness, something we talk about a lot in our classes, about creating a culture of preparedness in the disaster classes, and make sure your caregiver is trained in preparedness. And this last one I love, try to stay positive and pray for world peace and love. So this is in their own words. Maybe some of you out there actually took this survey. If you have, we're grateful. If you'd like to take this survey, please drop us a line and let us know if you'd like a copy just for your own use. And now we're going to end. And how are we doing for time? We're good. We have a few minutes for any questions or comments. We have somebody, Jamie, who's going to be looking at it. I just want to take a minute to thank our coordinators. We have Brianna Biez, we have Natalia Ramon, we have the Meta, and Jamie Epstein, and who else did I miss? Cameron, Lindsay, our wonderful team, and of our student interns, all headed for wonderful things as they're about to be graduating pretty much in the next couple of months. So we have anything coming in that you'd like to bring up? And if not, maybe I'll take this minute to welcome all of you. So right now, as I mentioned, we're here at the downtown campus. This is the School of Global Public Health. We're in a building that's on Broadway, very close to the Washington Square Park. And right now we're in a room with some graduate students. Some of them are about to launch into the next part of their careers by going on for even more education. We have Kristen with us today, who's going on for her DRPH that she'll be starting sometime later this summer. Always exciting. And we have others about to launch into their jobs, hopefully really wonderful jobs. So if we don't have anything coming in yet, or any way to get at those, then I think we're going to move ahead, which she has a few, and then we'll. Okay.
On the percent of people with disabilities accessing emergency services or receiving aid or assistance.
That's a great question. I know there are about 1 out of 5 people in the US with 1 or more disabilities. It's a huge number. And of course, it's increasing as the population is aging. So it's about 58 million people. What proportion of them actually go on to get assistance or health planning is a number that I really don't know. And I don't know if anybody knows that, because that would mean some kind of a really proportionate survey across the US of all people. But we know that in general, while I believe personally, and I've seen it in the literature, and I feel it almost like in my bones, that people are taking disaster preparedness more seriously. And especially if they're in these high-risk areas where there's wildfires or heavy flooding. Look, even here in New York City, we had a number of deaths just a few years ago of people who drowned in their basement apartments because we had unbelievably heavy rain. And those basement apartments had hardly any egress. So if they tried to leave, they actually were blocked from leaving, and people actually drowned in those apartments. Now, I noticed this past year, as spring is coming up and we're getting more and more rain, the Office of Emergency Management in New York is sending out widespread notices. Please, people who are in basement apartments, make sure you sign up for alerts, and they'll have shelters open where they can go because those places get flooded high enough to actually drown adults. So the number, I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows, but in my gut, while I think they're increasing, I think it's very low. And in general, in the US, less than 50% of Americans have even the barest minimum of disaster preparedness elements in place, like a go bag or stockpiles of food. So it's still quite low, at least overall. I hope that answers it as best as I can.
We have another question from Charles Sharp, wondering if there was emphasis in internal resident caregiver or caregivers that come in daily or as needed.
We actually have data on who is giving you the or helping you with the care. Is it a family member, a roommate, or an actual caregiver, a paid caregiver? I don't think we have enough numbers because the sample, after all, was only 127 to ever let us really tease that apart, but we will certainly try and do so. And if you send us your email, as we're working through more analysis, more refined analysis, that is something we can look at. My guess is maybe not, because we've done other studies about caregivers, and actually, it was done in San Francisco. I was quite shocked at how many people never even made any planning with their caregiver. And when we look at the comments in that particular one from a few years ago in San Francisco, they would make comments like, I don't trust my caregiver, or I'm afraid they wouldn't show up, or they have their own family, or they're not really like my family. Very, very kind of painful things to read about, but I can definitely take a deeper dive in that, and we will. So thank you. That's a great question.
Okay, we have another one from Nena asking, how do we prepare the community and educate our special needs community to advocate for accessibility during natural disasters?
Now, thank you so much. That's a great question. Here we are at the 35th anniversary of the ADA, a landmark civil rights law that protects civil rights of people with disabilities. And at this stage, 35 years later, we're still having to wonder about that. Advocacy, I think, is everything. And the disabled community are wonderful advocates for themselves, but we need everyone to advocate for that, because the truth is, at one point, almost all of us are going to need those accommodations as we age. And I just read something really scary where it was something like, I think it's something close to 40 or 45% of all Americans by 2040 will be 65 years and older. There is a wave of baby boomers about to hit. It's going to hit this US with a force, because I don't believe that we're ready for that in terms of housing, accessibility, elevators, staircases. Still, we have a lot of subway stations that do not have elevators. It's going to be a real problem, but I think we could do better. And I think advocacy is probably something that Jerry and the people at the Pacific ADA can talk to you about more, because that's in their DNA. But thank you. Great question.
Another one
Last question
from Christina, wondering if the School of Global Public Health here at NYU has done any work to create a plan for these students with disabilities.
Oh, that's a great question, and one that I'm very happy to say we have an amazing advocate here on the campus, Anne Marie McLaughlin. She's the head of emergency management for this part of the campus, and probably more broadly for the NYU campus. She's a leader in the IAEM, International Association of Emergency Managers, and was the head of the disability group. I think Jerry probably knows her or knows of her. She is an amazing advocate, and they have a very active office for student disabilities. I know that during COVID, when they had all the students leave and they closed the dorms, a lot of students were international students. They actually had it set up where they had accessible vans come and take the students who had to leave the dorm and their accessible room, and they placed them in accessible hotel rooms nearby with their cohort of friends. This school has gotten that whole program really under great control. But sadly, I think that we may be an exception. I don't really know for a fact, but we can ask Jerry and our colleagues at the Pacific ADA that we need to do more, for no doubt. But here we have a very strong program like that. So thank you for that. I'm going to switch gears now and let me introduce you to our next speaker, Alexis Merchanoff, who is an assistant professor in the environmental public health and the director of the environmental public health program. I think her slides are going to come right. Yes, they are. This is great. Things are working here. Would you like a bottle of water? Thank you so much.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, so thank you for having me. Thanks to Robin and everybody for organizing. Is this camera on? Oh, hi everyone. Okay. Thanks to Robin and everybody for organizing the conference today. I'm going to talk about disaster resilience within the context of socially vulnerable populations, with a special emphasis on older adults. I have been studying older adults and their preparedness and resilience to disasters for a long time now. And so I'm going to share some of what I've learned. And I think that there is a lot that we can hopefully pull from what I've learned about older adults and apply it to populations who are living with disabilities. As we know, many older adults are living with disabilities. And so I have a couple of topics that I want to talk about today. The first is, what is disaster resilience? And even just taking a step back from that, what do we mean by being resilient? What does it mean to be resilient? Second, to think about how are older adults vulnerable to disasters? And third, who among older adults are most vulnerable? So thinking about certain subpopulations of older adults, and who would benefit from targeted disaster programming, which would hopefully increase preparedness and long-term resilience to these disasters. So let's start here with resilience. This resilience is really a concept that nobody can agree on what it means. There are a lot of definitions. Generally speaking, we can agree that it means some sort of ability to bounce back or effectively adapt from a disruptive event. For a long time, we used to think that resilience was this static characteristic. It was something that we were born with, an innate quality. But now we've kind of shifted our thinking and we consider it to be an adaptive process, which means that people can learn how to be resilient, that we can give them the skills and the tools to be more resilient. We also tend to think about resilience more at this individual level, right? That in terms of psychological resilience. This tends to be what people think about when we're talking about resilience, but we have shown in research that it leads to higher quality of life, greater happiness, better mental health, lower depression, greater longevity, and reduced mortality. A lot of benefits, right? When we're talking about disaster researchers, typically disaster researchers are thinking about resilience within the community context. So I would like to argue that, we should consider individual level resilience, but we should also be thinking about community resilience. There are some real seminal papers on what do we mean about community resilience within a disaster context. One written by Fran Norris that is cited quite a bit, where she talks about adaptive capacities. And it's good to think about how well can communities adapt to these stressful, disruptive events? How might they be flexible in terms of economic development, social capital, information and communication, and community competence? More recently, people have begun to measure disaster resilience at an individual level. This is something that I've been looking at. And we tend to think about this as physical resources, supportive relationships, problem-solving abilities, distress regulation, and optimism, okay? So there are some overlaps here, but just to give us a general kind of foundation of how to think about resilience and also resilience within a disaster context. So I want to start off with this phrase, this statement. Older adults are vulnerable to disaster. How many people, will start in the room since I can't see you all on the screen, but in the room, how many people think that this is true by a show of hands? Okay, everybody. Okay, you're right. But I'm going to complicate this a little bit, okay? So there are a growing number of older adults. They're living in high-risk areas that are prone to hurricanes, heat waves, wildfires, blizzards, flooding. We know that older adults are vulnerable to the exposure and the consequences of disasters because of chronic illness, mobility difficulties, and depleted social networks. We've also learned over the last several years that among all age groups, older adults are the least prepared for disasters, which is interesting compared to what Robin found in her study, and are the most at risk during all phases of a disaster. So thinking about mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, and they have the highest rate of disaster-related deaths. But coming back to this is what I mean by complicating this, okay? When we're talking about older adults, what do we mean? Okay, we tend to think of older adults as this homogeneous group, but there's a lot of variability. Are we talking about people 65 and older, 75 and older? Are they living alone? Do they have access to adult children? What kind of resources do they have? Oftentimes we talk to people nowadays who are 65, they don't think of themselves as older adults, right? So what are we really talking about? And so I in all of my work, I really tried to focus on thinking about older adults as this group with a lot of variability, okay, and trying to understand that. Second, what do we mean by vulnerable to a disaster? How might this vulnerability vary depending on the stage of a disaster? And by stage, I'm thinking about these 4 stages of emergency management: mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery. Could it be that older adults are more vulnerable in the preparedness and response phases, but do a little better when it comes to recovery and mitigation? Maybe. Let's see. So I'm going to pull from a couple of different studies that we have going on, a couple of older ones, and then one that's kind of in progress. So this study on Hurricane Sandy looked at post-disaster housing needs and the recovery of older adults. And we looked at the effects of social and environmental disruption on emergency housing transitions. So thinking about when people evacuated and if they were displaced, how long were they displaced? How many places did they stay after they evacuated? And who did they stay with? Did they stay with family, friends, or were they by themselves? And then we looked at self-reported recovery. What we did here that was kind of different was that we had a large enough sample. This is 1,000 people who were impacted by Sandy living in New Jersey. We were able to compare different age groups. So we looked at the young old, which is 55 to 64, the mid old, which is 65 to 74, and the old, or 75 plus. And we compared that with younger adults, 19 to 54. And what we found was that the oldest old after Hurricane Sandy, they had the highest rates of housing damage. They were more likely to evacuate than younger adults. They're more likely to stay with family rather than by themselves if they were displaced. And they were more likely to have reported that they had recovered from Hurricane Sandy. So despite all of the exposure, despite the disruption, they were more likely than any other age group to say, no, I'm recovered, I'm okay. So what this suggests is that they're a little bit more resilient when it comes to recovery than younger age groups. If we're thinking about Hurricane Katrina, we have a cohort of 1,079 highly impacted residents who we followed over a 10-year period who were living in Louisiana and Mississippi at the time of the storm. And we looked at mobility. And here I'm talking about not physical mobility, but mobility in terms of movement. How many times did people move after they were displaced? And how did this relate to their long-term mental health? What we found was that older adults, so in this case, we looked at 65 plus, that they had very high rates of mobility after Katrina. So once they were displaced, they were moving anywhere from 5, 6, 7 times over our study period, our 10-year study period. But they also had the highest mental health scores among all age groups over this 10-year study period. So this kind of supports this idea, which we're starting to see more and more, that older adults are mentally resilient to disaster exposure, and it supports this inoculation hypothesis, right? Over time, you start to deal with a lot of kind of traumatic things. You may lose a spouse. You go through retirement, like these big life course transitions. And so when something like Katrina comes along, you have more to rely on, more to say to yourself, okay, I can get through this, right? I'll talk in a little bit about why these things are important. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears. This is a study that we're kind of, we're analyzing the data now, but I'm going to share some of the things that we have found so far. This is a Hurricane Ian older adult recovery study where we have done in-depth interviews with older adults. And just to talk a little bit about the study aims, we wanted to gain a deeper understanding of how disaster exposure and climate risk influence decisions to age in place. We wanted to compile evidence as to how coastal communities can build social infrastructure, and I will talk about that in a little bit, but how they could build social infrastructure that promotes resilience despite growing environmental risk, and then use this evidence to increase awareness and enhance policy discussions on climate mitigation with a focus on older adults. So you may or may not remember, because there have been so many storms, but Hurricane Ian struck Southwest Florida at the end of September in 2022. It was a Category 4 storm, almost a Category 5, so very powerful. And we used address-based sampling to randomly sample older adults who had lived in either Lee or Collier County. So this is like where Fort Myers, Sanibel, Naples, if you're familiar with this area of Florida. And we enrolled 51 older adults. And then we supplemented this with referrals from them of neighbors and friends who had experienced very high levels of damage. So we have a cohort of 73 older adults. We conducted Zoom interviews and telephone interviews with them over a 3-month period. And we focused on things like their exposure to the storm, their sense of place, their risk perceptions, health impacts, and future climate risk. This is a map of where our respondents were randomly sampled from. The black dots is, that's where they were living at the time of the storm. And you can see most of them are living in this red area, which means that they experienced storm surge heights of at least 5 feet. In a lot of cases, the area of Sanibel, which is over here, this island here, they had 12 to 15 feet of storm surge. So what are some of the barriers and facilitators of older adult disaster recovery that we have found so far? I put them so far into 3 buckets: homeowners insurance, adult children, and place attachment. And so let's start with homeowners insurance. I think that homeowners insurance, people have started to hear about this a lot more, especially after the LA wildfires. When we were doing these interviews back in 2023, it was becoming very apparent to me how important this issue is becoming. We heard countless stories of people who either could not afford their homeowners insurance anymore, so they just dropped the policy. We heard stories of people who had filed claims and had still not received a dime from their providers. We heard stories of people who had been paying into policies for years, filed a claim, and then those insurance companies claimed bankruptcy. The most challenging part is that older adults tend to live on fixed incomes. A lot of them move to areas like Florida because of cost of living. And what we heard is that these savings of moving to Florida is actually being offset by the cost of homeowners insurance. So this is becoming a very, very big issue. I don't know that there are a lot of answers right now, but this is a quote from one of our respondents. Everybody's insurance has gone up. A lot of the insurance companies left the state because they had such losses, and people have had a terrible time dealing with these insurance companies afterwards. The state of Florida has created its own insurer. It's kind of like a stopgap, last resort homeowners insurance policy. I have heard endless complaints from respondents and a lot of doubt that it's actually going to be able, like, financially viable. They think it's not going to be able, they're going to be able to sustain it. The second is, this is really, I guess, both a barrier and a facilitator, is thinking about adult children. We heard lots of stories of older adults who relied on their adult children for help. This respondent and her husband went to live with her daughter for a month. They ended up moving in with a friend for a few more months while the husband mitigated the house. These adult children help their parents deal with insurance companies. They help them mitigate their homes. They help them with places to stay, and they help them with even financial things like buying a washer and a dryer, okay? If you don't have adult children, or if you do and you have a strained relationship with them, who are you turning to? Okay, so I think this can be a barrier and a facilitator. We had people who didn't have adult children, or maybe they weren't nearby. And this couple, they weren't severely impacted, but this gave them pause. And they said, okay, well, maybe actually we can't be living in Florida because we need to be somewhere close to a support system in case one of us gets sick. Or if another storm comes, we're not going to have that support that we need. And so this couple had been talking about actually moving closer to adult nieces and nephews. So it's another thing to kind of consider. Lastly, place attachment. And this is kind of the anchor of a lot of the work that I do. What you may be familiar or not be familiar with the term managed retreat, this idea that we can move vulnerable populations away from, populations away from vulnerable areas like coastlines. Older adults do not want to leave. They want to stay in their homes. They want to age independently. This respondent said, could it happen tomorrow? Meaning like another big storm? Absolutely. The table of water is higher than it was in the 80s. Docks have to be built higher. There's a problem, but we've gone over 100 years without anything like Hurricane Ian. Now, after this, they've dealt with Milton and Helene, so I'd love to go back to this respondent and say, hey, what do you think now? But this is really the reality that this is how people are rationalizing, like, okay, we've lived through the big one. Nothing else is going to happen. So here are some key takeaways, right? So homeowners insurance is becoming a barrier related to climate change. It's could impact the ability of older adults to age in risky environmental areas. The importance of informal social support. Maybe it's adult children, especially when there's minimal post-disaster recovery programming. Okay, in a place like Florida, there was, in comparison to New Jersey, very, very little. Okay, and it's possible that this is the direction that we're moving, right? That there's not going to be robust recovery programming, which means that these informal social support systems are going to become even more important. So how can we kind of build those up prior to events happening? And then the last is that older adults want to live where they want to live. They want to age in their homes, even if they know that it's risky. If that is the case, then what kinds of resources, and I'm not talking about financial, but what kind of social resources do they need in order to do so? And this is my kind of my last key takeaway or like thing that I want to leave you with. We spend a ton, or we have spent a ton of money in this country on building resilient physical infrastructure. Things like the levee system in New Orleans. We need these things. They're really expensive. If we took a fraction of that money and invested it in communities and things like social infrastructure, so thinking about libraries, public spaces, green space, where people can create these social ties that are so important for recovery, we would be saving so much money long term. So that is the one thing that I really want to leave you with. Thank you all so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
This is while she's bringing it up. Can you go back to the slide you had of the people in the nursing home sitting in the pool of water?
Oh yes, that was after Harvey.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering.
They were helicoptered out after somebody posted that picture on Twitter.
It's sitting in water. Posted the picture.
The nursing home. And it was the only way that they found out that they were like that, because there was no power or anything. So yeah. And how long would they have sat there? This is one of the benefits of social media, right? Is trying to get the message out, and they were able to get a helicopter there to evacuate them.
Is the insurance also I know it's a barrier, right? Because it's harder to get insurance, but is it also being viewed as something that could be positive because it's kind of encouraging people to stay away from areas that are higher risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's no easy answer to this, right? Part of the challenge is that, we have this national flood insurance program that we probably never should have created in the first place because it incentivized people to live in these risky areas, and now it's bankrupt and we can't really keep up with the payments. I don't really know what the answer to this is, right? It's kind of an emerging issue. I think my biggest concern at this point is once homes are destroyed, and this is something that I heard in after Ian, and I think it's happening in LA, is that people bought homes at a much lower price. They're worth a lot more now. They can't afford to rebuild them. So if you paid $200,000 for your home and now it's worth over $1 million, you can't afford to rebuild at that rate, right? So what ends up happening is they sell the property, and then some sort of investor comes in, pays for it, and someone else very wealthy will buy it, right? And so the communities are changing. People of lower economic means, and it could be older adults, are being priced out of their communities. And I think that there needs to be some sort of policy put in place so that if people want to rebuild, that we can help do that, but rebuild in a way that is resilient to future climate events.
Could you repeat that question so that everyone on Zoom can?
Oh,
rehear
sure,
you? Just the
sorry.
original question.
Well, insurance coverage is a problem, but is it also in some regards being seen as a positive because it is discouraging people from moving to places where they can't get insurance coverage for risky areas?
The high cost of insurance is a discouraging factor from buying in the zone, so that could overall be seen as a positive because people are.
Right, positive or negative. Can they hear that or? Okay.
I think you're at the mic. And
Oh, okay. So basically is homeowners insurance, is it a barrier or a facilitator to being able to live in areas that are at risk? Like, should we actually be supporting people to live in these areas or not?
We have a question from Mary asking what studies or outreach is available to neighborhoods with older adults being exposed to economic and social factors during disasters.
Well, there's the work that we do here. It's really, I would say, an emerging area, trying to focus on older adults. Are they interested in learning about studies?
Yeah, what studies or outreach is available to neighborhoods with older adults?
Yeah, so there's been work after Katrina, after Sandy. I know that there are people doing work right now on Helene. We've been doing some work on wildfires in California and older adults, the impact on health. And then there are some people who are doing some intervention work that's more of a national level. I would say that it's really like trying to think about all of these studies are trying to think about how can we increase the kind of ties that older adults have to their communities, because what happens is once a disaster hits, older adults need to know where to get information. They need to know who to reach out to. It could be a church, it could be a community center, right? It's not just FEMA. So it's not just these traditional mechanisms that people think about after a disaster, but so much information flows through the community. So how can we encourage older adults to kind of be the foundation of their community and be more integrated?
Yeah, so we have another question from Jace asking how we can increase awareness and support for disaster-related resources that the general public may be less aware of.
So one of the challenges with older adult disaster preparedness is that it almost exists in two silos. It's like there's the disaster preparedness policy piece, or maybe it's emergency management, and then there's the Department of Aging. And one of my goals is to try to tie those together a little better, because they tend, at least in the case of like New Jersey and a little bit in Florida, they don't speak to each other as much, and yet they're doing a lot of programming that could overlap really well. And so that's one of the things that I think we could do better, is just like a lot of this programming is kind of there, but how can we more directly tie it together so that older adults can be like, oh, like that's for me. I need that. It's accessible. I can use it. So that's one of the things that I'm working on right now.
And then, is there any information on what happens to older adults when they are displaced due to a natural disaster?
Yeah, I mean, we learned a lot after Hurricane Katrina because the population that we were studying, they were all highly impacted, and about 80% of them were displaced. You know, people rely on social networks for housing. They rely on, it could be a niece, it could be an adult child, it could be somebody from their church, but they rely on those networks for finding housing. The link between finding stable housing and recovery is very, very tightly wound. And so that's one of, I think, is one of our biggest challenges. And it's something that we're seeing with the LA wildfires, is when you're in a densely populated, possibly urban area, and there's mass displacement, how do you help people find stable housing? It's a huge, huge problem. And yet we see it over and over again. And to me, it should be very turnkey. Like, why can we not figure out what those policies should look like to get people into stable homes? And so for older adults, you know, a lot of times they will go with the flow, but they can miss opportunities for programming unless they have help. So really helping older adults connect to those programs, whether it's through like a VOAD in their like a volunteer or voluntary organizations during disasters, or a church or a long-term recovery group, like making sure that they know that these things exist and that it's not a scam. A lot of older adults are very concerned about being scammed. So rather than engage with different groups, recovery groups, they rather just not, because they are very concerned about that.
Another question coming in regarding any information individuals can access after a disaster, specifically anything from FEMA?
You know, I think people, and I think Robin could speak to this probably very well. You know, FEMA serves a very specific purpose, and I'm not sure the general public really knows what the job of FEMA is, but it's really like when it first happens, right? They're not going to be there long term. And so to me, the most important thing, and we saw this after Sandy, is creating these community level long-term recovery groups that kind of can become this one-stop shop for people to get information. And it's usually like a trusted member of the community, somebody's face that they know, who can help people with paperwork and tie everything together for them. So to me, having those in place prior to an event happening is really, really important. California has done a great job with that. After the wildfires, I've heard really positive stories about the voluntary organizations during disasters that have come in and worked together to try to do this. There's always room for improvement, right? So, but these events keep becoming like bigger and more consequential. And so there are new challenges that emerge. But I would say connecting with your community and trying to understand who those voluntary organizations would be, whether it's Red Cross or YMCA, who might help after a disaster.
That leads to the next question, Jeffrey's asking if there are any studies that look at what local resiliency initiatives may be available and effective in preparing these communities.
You know, I can speak from an example that we had but it kind of shifted because of COVID. But the interesting thing is that we found out that the same community resources that were needed to be kind of climate resilient were also needed during COVID. And it's about being able to find economic opportunities, understanding who are the people in your neighborhood who are going to need the most assistance and kind of having a buddy system for them, understanding your evacuation routes, or like preparedness pieces. If you're thinking about COVID, like how can I keep myself from being exposed? So I think that a lot of resilience needs to come from the local level, because your local community is going to know what the needs are and they're going to know what the strengths are. And the idea that a larger entity that may not know your community is going to come in and be able to solve all the problems, I don't know that that's the best way of thinking about it. So finding a way, this was in East Boston where people are actually very concerned about flooding and storm surge. And so they were like, how are we going to get out of here? There's like a tunnel in and out of East Boston and some other roads, but it's hard. And so they really wanted to find a way to build resilience in their community. And they relied on a central trusted organization, volunteer organization, to kind of be the hub of distributing information and identifying the vulnerabilities and helping people come up with a plan. And so I think finding these trusted brokers in your community is really important. That's something that we have seen over and over again.
And then the final question is regarding any research you may have done focusing on people with disabilities during earthquakes.
Oh, I have not touched earthquakes. I'm so sorry. I don't have, I really, I find people who do the earthquake research are, that's what they do. And I know very, very little about that. So if anybody else has something they could share on that, I'm sure that would be helpful, but sorry.
Maybe Jerry.
Maybe Jerry.
He lives in South Carolina now.
Get to the end of this, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. So interesting. I mean, resilience, it's a major issue for us, and we have decided in the spirit of being resilient to move forward. And since we're not only on time, but we're ahead of schedule, we're going to keep going. But please, if you need time to stretch whatever, I'm going to take these few minutes to introduce you to a close colleague of ours and the director of the Center on Disability and the Pacific ADA, Jerry Davison. I know a lot of you know her and have met with her. A lot of you may not know that she does have a law degree from the University of South Carolina School of Law. She has served as a staff attorney with the state's protection and advocacy system. She has fought cuts to Medicaid. I think you may be in for some rocky time in the future. She's investigated institutional abuse and neglect, and she has advocated tirelessly for people with disabilities in their local communities. The issue of the aging and resilience is so incredibly important. In a recent study we did with people who have been multiply seriously exposed who were older in the New York City area. And so people who've been through Superstorm Sandy, who had been through COVID, and who had been through World Trade Center disaster. So these people were quite older. And it's for sure, if they had family members that even if they had money to rebuild, especially after Sandy, maybe they were out in Staten Island or one of the other places where their homes were destroyed, they might have had insurance, but without that family to lean on, or members of their church, or a close cousin that kind of lived near enough by, they needed a place to stay while they were rebuilding, and they didn't want to stay or could afford a hotel for all that time. So having those connections, I've seen it over and over when people move away from their children because they want to go to a better climate or whatever. It winds up not being a good situation in many cases. So please think twice if you are thinking about that. Stay close to your family. Jerry has been on getting back to Jerry now, on the healthcare and research committees for the ADA National Network. She serves on the Affinity Group Advisory Board for it's the PHI, which is the Public Health Institute, and she's on that advisory board for racial equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. She's just been a wonder with the Pacific ADA. One of the most important things I think that she did is she had her staff or somebody, I guess it was a team perhaps, who redid the website, which is now, I would say, and maybe I'm a little biased, the best disability website in the United States, if not the world. I mean, it is a great treasure. So I'd like to introduce her to you, and she's going to say a few words since we're ahead of schedule. I think a lot of the questions that came up, including the issue about the insurance, perhaps, maybe Jerry can help. So thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, and as Robin stated, my background is more of a legal one, not a research one. So if you can keep your questions more in that vein, that would be great. Also, Jan is coordinating our panel a little bit later, and she is probably the most well-versed on the Americans with Disabilities Act of anybody I know. So I think she can also jump into, but I just wanted to talk a little bit, well, first of all, just about how grateful I am for this partnership with NYU and the work we are doing with emergency preparedness for people with disabilities. We know that these natural disasters are occurring more frequently. So, and we know that people with disabilities are often left behind in this. So far, we've talked about more the personal responsibility and preparedness for people with disabilities, and that is obviously very, very important, but they're not the only ones with roles in emergency preparedness. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the work that the Pacific ADA Center is doing with shelter side accessibility. So thinking about those emergency shelters that people are evacuated to, a lot of times may not be accessible for people with disabilities. And so we want to talk a little bit about some problem solving in that area. So we have been working with the California Office of Emergency Services to create a tool that helps folks who go out and assess emergency shelters. And that can be local government employees, it could be Red Cross staff, but just thinking through those folks who are thinking ahead of emergencies and natural disasters and preparing for where folks might need to evacuate. So just a little bit, in case you aren't familiar with the Pacific ADA Center, we are one of 10 regional centers that are funded by the federal government to provide information, resources, and training on the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you'll see a map here of the 10 regions. The Pacific ADA Center is the green one that's labeled number 9. Robin pointed these out earlier and went through the states that we serve, so I'm not going to do that again. But just so you know, if you're on this call, there is an ADA center that serves you, and so you can go to the ADA National Network site and find that. But the goal is to support the mission of the ADA, which is equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. So planning ahead, shelter site planning, that's key for local emergency preparedness and equal access under the ADA for people with disabilities. Some people think that the ADA doesn't apply during emergencies, like it's temporarily suspended, but it's even more important during emergencies and natural disasters, and people still have responsibilities and rights during emergencies. Some of the folks that have responsibilities under the ADA during emergencies are government agencies and staff, including agencies, ADA coordinators, emergency response organizations like FEMA, Red Cross, et cetera. emergency responders. So you're thinking about EMTs, policemen, firemen, emergency shelter staff, and volunteers. So even folks who are volunteering still have responsibilities under the ADA. Some of the requirements for emergency shelters: people with disabilities, that's the PWD, must have access to emergency programs, services, activities, and facilities. Governments and emergency response organizations, they must make changes to their policies, practices, and procedures if that is needed to provide equal access and effective communication under the law. The exceptions to those responsibilities only happen if a local government or an organization that is doing emergency response can claim that that would fundamentally alter the nature of their program or services, or it would result in an undue financial or administrative burden. And that's a pretty high bar, according to lawsuits that have been heard on these issues. So you saw several stages of emergency planning and after effects. This kind of goes along with that. The ADA applies to all of the stages. That's the preparation and the plan development, emergency testing, emergency communications and alerts, evacuation and transport, the shelters that are set up, housing and relocation programs, disaster-related benefit programs, any medical care or services as the result after an emergency, any recovery programs, and then that damage repair process. So the law still applies to all of these factors. With those responsibilities and stuff, what we wanted to look at specifically was shelter accessibility, and the California Office of Emergency Services wanted to partner with us on this. And so we worked with them, and we have created a tool that's still being tested right now, but it incorporates both the ADA and California state law requirements on accessibility. California state laws are above and beyond the ADA, so we put both of them in there. It's an interactive tool. It can be filled out on a tablet on site. It's logic-based, so you can say, if you have more than one bathroom, then you can put multiple bathrooms in the tool and assess them each, or multiple parking lots or parking garages. And then you can add comments about what needs to be corrected. So just because you do a test on an emergency shelter and it comes out with some things that aren't accessible, doesn't mean that you rule it out as a potential shelter site. Because if you did that, you would never have an emergency shelter. There's not a single building that I've been to that completely passes the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, which is a shame since, as Robin mentioned, it's been around for 35 years. But what this will do is then allow you to figure out what needs to be corrected before that emergency happens, so that we can make sure it's accessible to everyone. And once you complete that, it would send the report to the person who inspected the site, and it also can send it to others if needed. So it's cool. You can send it to other people. It spits out a report, and it basically gives you a plan for what needs to be corrected, and you can decide what of the violations are going to be the primary focus, because those are the ones that would prevent access to the shelter. Yes.
Is doing the filling out of that.
Yes. So a lot of times this is a Red Cross staff member who goes out and does the site. Now it can be local governments, and they can work together with Red Cross. And so they can send someone out and they can do it together and see, because if Red Cross, let's say, finds some issues, it's the government building that actually has the issues. So it's really a partnership between. So if they're assessing a school, a lot of times, a school may be a good site, then it's not Red Cross's responsibility to make sure the site necessarily is ADA accessible, because it's also a school that should be ADA accessible. So so there's got to be some partnerships formed here. And so, but that's a great question. And we're working with different entities right now to train on the tool and get some feedback. So we're going to see what different entities think about it. So yes, we're in a beta testing phase of this. And then from there, our goal is to pick a county in California that we would pilot this with, through a partnership, hopefully with Red Cross and the government, the county government. And then we would make revisions based on that feedback. And then once we've done that, then we would release it statewide, since this is California specific. But our ultimate goal then is to make a nationwide version that can be used over. And that says that is California state specific. That's my error. That is not California state specific. So the ultimate goal would be that counties and emergency preparedness partners would update their list of potential shelters regularly to make sure facilities are viable sites, because we've learned that they don't necessarily update the list, and so that building may be being used for something else, or it may not be what it used to be at all. It may not be accessible, so just making sure those sites are up to date. Assess the shelter at least 6 months prior to need, so you give yourself enough time to make those corrections. Work on burial removal to make that site more accessible. That could be, making sure there's a ramp, making sure the parking lot has enough accessible spaces. Typically, it doesn't necessarily have to be something super expensive. Most people with disabilities should be able to stay in their community shelter and not be segregated. I think that's a misconception that people with disabilities get their own shelter. That is against the spirit of the ADA. We shouldn't be unnecessarily segregated. So making sure that folks get to stay together unless they have very high medical needs and where they do need some specialized care and need a different shelter environment. I put just some contact information. I know some folks have some questions that we may not know off the top of our heads. And so if you email us at that info@adapacific.org, you can get some answers, and if we don't know them, we will send you to the appropriate people. But you can also subscribe to our email list too, just so you can get news and updates as this tool develops or as other news comes out and events that we continue to do. Once we finish up our article and we release more information about our study, that will be going out through our listserv too. So that's a good way to keep up to date about emergency preparedness work that we're doing with NYU as well. And that is all I have. So we'll see what questions.
So Nanette is asking about the specific software tool that is used for the assessment.
Yes, Nanette. So what we wanted to do was keep it low cost, because we don't want what we hear from local ADA coordinators is that budgets are a big deal, and so it's actually just through JotForm, and which is, I think we do pay a small amount for that, but it's just a logic-based tool through a very inexpensive platform called JotForm.
Tara is wondering if the pilot program will be available in any county in California.
Yeah, so we are still trying to decide which county would be best. I think what we're looking at now is where we have some folks who are pretty progressive in the emergency preparedness realm, and looking through those connections with Cal OES to pick that county. So it will be one pilot county to start with, and then if we get enough feedback from that, then our goal is to release it statewide after that.
Pam is wondering if service animals are included in the program.
So yeah, so a person's right to a service animal extends to emergency shelters, absolutely. And so that is something that we always need to account for. And that the tool that we're creating is more about the physical site accessibility. So the service animals don't necessarily come into play, but where that would come into play is the training of the emergency shelter staff and the policies that go along with that. But absolutely. And that's something that we didn't talk a lot about in the other presentations too, but that's something, preparing for what's going to happen with your service animal, depending on, where you end up after an emergency. So that's something that you need to prepare for.
Another question is regarding the general time frame in which this may be released to the public.
I do not have a definite on that. I wish I do. We want to move forward. We are pushing this. We know it's desperately needed because we are seeing more of these. So our hope is, that we can find a pilot site within the next month or so. But then it's kind of out of our hands on how quickly we can we can get folks to move forward and test the pilot. So our goal is, by the end of this year, hopefully, but it's out of our control. So we'll have to see how our partners and what all they have going on, because obviously they're dealing with emergency response. Okay, thank you so much. Yes.
Covers the cost of the remediation that might be needed. I'm thinking now about toilets.
Mhm.
Could be very costly. And, sometimes you need to make changes at the last minute about where you're going to shelter people. For instance, in wildfires, all of a sudden it shifts and you need, another location. Could that tool ever be like a just-in-time use?
So I don't know if you all were able to hear Robin, but she had two questions. One, who pays for the cost of remediation if you find issues when you do the assessment? Two was, what if you need to change your shelter location at the last minute based on what the disaster is and where it originates? And so I'll start with the second one. So the goal is to have multiple locations assessed and ready. So that way you're prepared for whatever may happen. So the list for every county, I mean, it is a list, like it's not just one shelter. And so it is something that you need to be constantly kind of assessing and making sure you're ready for. So that would be the goal there, is that you have multiple shelters that are ready based on where the disaster is. The second question is the cost of remediation. So Jan, are you with me here?
I'm with you, Jerry. This is Jan.
Okay, I was gonna say, it's not her time to present yet, so I wouldn't. So Jan, okay, so I don't know if you want to chime in on this, because obviously if they're using a government building that's already in use for something else, like a school or something, but then if it's a government-owned building, then the person who owns the building should be responsible for the cost of remediation, would be my thought. But you are the expert.
Well, generally, if it, and I'm hearing an echo here, sorry about that, folks, but it is Title II or state and local governments, cities, counties, states, have to do what's called program accessibility. And that means that not every building has to be accessible, but every they have to make every program accessible. So evacuation and sheltering would be considered a program under ADA Title II. So if they find a building that just has too many accessibility barriers that can't easily be removed or remediated, then they really would have to say this building is not appropriate for this sheltering program within this city. So they would have to move to a different building. So they're not, the city is not necessarily required to remove all those accessibility barriers if they're found, although one would hope they would remove them over time, but they are responsible for making sure that their sheltering program is accessible, so that they actually find a different building that does have fewer accessibility barriers and people could reasonably use for that.
Thank you for that, Jan. I appreciate the nuances there. Any other questions in there?
Yes, we have another question. Thinking of certifying shelters as being capable of serving people with disabilities.
Yes, and like I mentioned earlier, technically that should be all shelters that are made available to the public. That there should not be a separate shelter for people with disabilities and those who aren't. I don't know, and Jan, feel free to chime in again if they can say that these are open to everyone, but also these are the most accessible shelters. And I don't know if.
Well, I mean, you certainly could identify shelters by their level of accessibility, but part of the ADA says that you have to integrate all of your programs, services, and activities, as much as you can. That means you integrate your disaster shelters and emergency shelters. You don't send all people with disabilities to one shelter that's kind of the most accessible one, because that may not be anywhere near their neighborhood. They may not be able to be with their friends and family or attendants, and they want to be integrated into their community shelter. So you want to make sure that all of the shelters throughout the community are as accessible as you can make them, so that people with a variety of different disabilities, it's not just people who use wheelchairs either that go to shelters, so that people with a variety of disabilities get a choice of where they want to go as close as possible to their neighborhood or home area. So that should be really the gold standard, is making sure that shelters are integrated.
Question, does every shelter need to be accessible to service animals, including, say, access to where they can use the bathroom outside, and maybe do they actually provide food for those animals in case people had to leave in a hurry and didn't bring enough stuff for their pets or shelter or service animals?
Want me to answer that, Jerry? Okay, you're muted, Jerry.
Sorry, I don't know how to unmute on this. They're unmuting it and muting it from remotely for me. Yeah, she asked that to you specifically. I think the mic was cut off when she said your name. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry. Okay. So Robin, yes, I mean, people are allowed to have service animals in shelters, and some shelters even allow emotional support animals. But as far as the ADA is concerned, it's really service animals that are allowed to be with people, to be with their handlers in shelters. Now, there's no requirement for a service animal relief area, an area for the service animals to do their business, in other words, but that's really a good practice to sort of identify an area, a grassy area that's very close by to the shelter, that the service animals can use for a relief area, that the handlers can easily get to, and that there's an accessible path to it from the shelter. The other thing is often, the shelters will buy extra food for, dog food, but I would say that the handler should bring, enough food to last, several days, kind of depending on the disaster. And then the shelter may be able to actually get some additional food for that service animal moving forward.
Thank you for that. I think we're going to go ahead and move on to the panel, because we want to make sure that everybody gets to hear about that. Robin, are you going to introduce that? Okay.
Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you, for being with us today again, and for staying with us, and especially being flexible as we move forward a little quicker than we thought through our program. Our next wonderful panel is being moderated by Jen Garrett, whom I met, oh my goodness, it's got to be over 10 years now. Jen is actually a big favorite in my disaster courses here at NYU. She's in all 3 of my disaster courses as a special interview. Her words of wisdom and her experiences, especially during COVID, just are lasting with the students, and they get so many life lessons and way beyond the scholastic lessons they might learn from Jan. So she is just an incredible resource about her lived experience and what it means in terms of disaster preparedness. So she's going to be running this wonderful panel. We have Derek Coates, who I'm pretty sure I've met at one point. But first, about Jen, she is an attorney. She's incredibly accomplished. She is the deputy director at the Pacific ADA at the Public Health Institute. She is their lead trainer and oversees all of the center's training and TA efforts. She approves all the curricular, and that's why it's perfect that she gets involved with their NYU family. We're her other family, so to speak. She went to Scripps in California, where she was a Phi Beta Kappa, no surprises there. And she has her JD from the University of Oklahoma College of Law. She is an incredible resource, unbelievably knowledgeable on every aspect about ADA. And she is actually the go-to person we always go to when we have questions about the ADA, which is a kind of complicated law and a little difficult when you're looking at emergency preparedness issues with respect to it. So she is going to be moderating this panel. And as I said, we have Derek Coates. I'm pretty sure I met him at a conference, an ADA conference in the past, and she'll introduce him some more, but he is the manager of the ADA Program Access at the Office of Disability Access and Compliance and the Vice Chancellor for Administration at Berkeley. So he was in my old stomping grounds. He was very famous on that campus. Everyone I knew at Berkeley knew about him and his great work. So we're thrilled to have him. We also have Cindy Soto, who is a systems change coordinator and the communities actively living independent and free in LA. So we have a San Francisco person and we have an LA person and we have Jan. Thank you all so much. We are so grateful. I'm going to turn this over now to Jan to lead this panel.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin, and thank you to everyone for being here today. And I'm so grateful to both Cindy and Derek for being with us today. And maybe Cindy can also turn on her camera when she's able to do that. I do see Derek. So, oh, there we go, Cindy, great. I think we're seeing you now. So I am going to let Derek, I'm going to let Cindy start, and she can introduce herself a little bit more and talk more about her disability, and then talk about some of the issues that she's thought about in terms of preparing and what she would need to do if she needed to evacuate. And so I will let Cindy do that. And then after Cindy, I will let Derek talk again a little bit more about his background, his disability, and what he plans to do for his own preparation for disasters and his own preparation to evacuate if that came forward for himself and also for his guide dog. And then after Derek and Cindy speak, I will speak a little bit about my own disability and about preparations that I have made in my life for being able to prepare for a disaster and evacuate if necessary. So Cindy, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. I'll begin by a visual description of myself. So I am laying down, as you may see or not, and I have a brown and black headband on. I have a computer trackball in front of my face because that is the way that I can best use my computer. So I was born with a disability. It's a connective tissue disorder, and it significantly limits my physical movement. So I am a lifetime wheelchair user. I also sustained a spinal cord injury, so I am paralyzed from my shoulders down to my toes. And so emergency preparedness is extremely important for me because I really cannot move on my own. So I live in LA, as Jan stated. And so the most common disaster type that I have experienced and in the LA area are earthquakes, which, we really can't predict at all. And then we also have heat waves quite often, especially lately because of the climate change and everything. And that can be somewhat more predictable. So I live on the second floor of a building. And so evacuating my home will be a challenge if it's anything other than a heat wave, I believe. Because since I do live on the second floor, I would have to use the elevator. And during earthquakes, that may be impossible. So what I have done is I have purchased, it's a special sling And you put a person in the sling, and it has handles all the way around, and someone, my neighbors, hopefully, caregiver, hopefully she's one of them is here, would have to carry me down one flight of stairs, which may not sound too bad for some people, but that'd be scary for me because it's already happened to me once, but I won't go into all that details. And I actually have 2 go bags because normally I do have someone with me, but you never know. So I have one for myself and one for a caregiver. And I thought about that right away because my caregivers have worked with me for many, many years, one of them for 24 years. So so I have to take care of my people too. I consider them my family. So I have all the usual things, in a go bag, food, water, a hand cranked radio, first aid, medication, that sort of thing. Flashlight. But there is something that I don't know if everybody thinks about is to have a flash drive with photos of your interior home, the things you own, your doctors and other emergency phone numbers and contacts that you might need. And so I think that is quite necessary actually for someone, well, anyone really. And I am really lucky in one case because I am connected with an independent living center here in LA. And they, for a while, about a year or two, they've been distributing emergency power supplies. There are like thousands of dollars. I could not afford that on my own. So for particular people who have exceptional needs as far as disability is concerned, they gave them away. So it's always plugged into my wall outlet, and it is good for, I'm not sure, 24 hours or less. I guess it depends on what's plugged into it. But that, I feel so much more safe now that I have the power supply emergency deck. I'm not sure what else you would like to know. I don't,
Well,
maybe I
Cindy,
can, yeah.
yeah, this is Jan speaking. So,
Hi.
you live in the LA area. I believe you live kind of southwest or southeast of the LA city, but
Yes.
recently there were major, um, basically metropolitan wildfires within Los Angeles, and very, very large wildfires. And I know that you experienced a lot of the air quality being severely diminished in your area, but it also probably made you think, well, gosh, if there was a wildfire and I didn't have very much notice, how would I get out of my apartment? How would I evacuate? What would I do? Because if you were not able to take your power wheelchair with you, for example, what would you do? So I'm going to let you kind of talk about if you've thought about evacuation and what process you would need to follow for that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I knew I forgot something. So I do not own an accessible vehicle, nor do my caregivers. So I don't know how I would get in the car. I guess I would use that special sling, but that I don't know about that. And also the biggest problem that we had I know quite a few people that were affected by those fires. And the biggest problem was transportation. They didn't own a car, they couldn't afford one, nor could they drive one even if they had one. They didn't necessarily live near family, and they were just fortunate that some people I know were able to get out, but I know a couple of people that are acquaintances of mine, and they were not. And it's we need to work on transportation. Very, very uh, important. So yeah, I do live outside of the fire area, but the air quality, oh my goodness, we could see and smell the smoke even like 30 miles away because that's where I live. They're about 30 miles away from the major fires. And I had about a week where I could not breathe normally. And breathing is one of the symptoms of having a high spinal cord injury. And I did get ill from that. Respiratory problems. I couldn't breathe as well, and I had to use like a breathing apparatus, a temporary one. And you are right. Air quality is exceptionally difficult for a whole lot of people.
Right. So yeah, so thank you for sharing that with us. And this is Jan speaking again. And Cindy, I wonder if are you able to wear a mask like an N95 mask, or does that restrict your breathing so much that you're actually not able to wear one if there's extremely poor air quality?
Yeah, that is a good point. Well, not only because of the air quality, but I'm not actually able to wear a mask properly because I drive my wheelchair with my chin, and the mask gets in the way of my joystick, and I have to be able to feel the joystick in order to drive. So I had to take it off of my chin and just put it underneath my mouth, which really that's not the proper way to stay safe, as far as any COVID, smoke, what have you. So that's another very serious thing that I need to deal with. Now, I do live about 3 blocks or so from a city community center. And so if there is a heat wave, I have gone to that center to stay cool. I do have an air conditioning, but it's not air conditioner, but it's not like a high powered one. When the temperature goes, well, anything over 80 is difficult for me because of my spinal cord injury. I do not perspire like other people do. And so my core gets very hot quickly. So that is another thing I need to deal with and to keep in mind. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one question that I see in the chat, and they're wondering why you live on the second floor.
You know, I own my own apartment, a condo, and I looked for over a month and I could not find one that was downstairs that I could actually alter, because like the bathroom doors, they're always too narrow for wheelchairs. Or they had even one step. It could stop me from getting in and out of a unit. And when you're looking for a place to live, you have to abide by the rules of the building, and nobody wanted a ramp outside. No, they just kept saying no, 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 no. And so I had to move to the second floor, but I really didn't want to. I tried not to. Oh, I will say one more thing about that. Myself and some other people with disabilities, and the Gray Panthers, which is a group of older adults. We have been talking for probably almost a year to our legislators, our local legislators at the state level, about having evacuation chairs in high-rise building, like any building over 6 floors, that each floor had to have an evacuation chair, at least one. It would be a state law. And it did not go forward this year, but they said that Assembly and Senate said that they would try to do it for next year. But they did promise they would do it. We have a strong disability community here in my city, so we do hope that they will follow through with their promise, and we will keep on them so that they will do that. Thank you.
Good, Cindy. Yeah. So this is Jan speaking again. So that's great. Maybe sometime you could let us know what the bill number is, and we could see if you have a bill number, we could track it and try to support that moving forward as well. And your point about having to take a place that was on the second floor, people that don't live in major urban areas may not realize that housing is there's such a shortage of housing in these areas, and it's so difficult to find accessible housing and housing that people can afford, whether they're buying their own condo, whether they live in an apartment complex. So the factor of accessibility, affordability, the location so that they could actually get to services they need. It's often just really, really hard to find the perfect place to be able to live. So I totally get and understand why you may have had to choose a place that is actually on the second floor because there's just such a limited housing stock.
Also in LA County anyway, all the new housing is being built on the second floor because the first floor they are saving for retail. So it's becoming even worse every day, every year.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of housing is only built over retail, and that's considered the ground floor of the housing because it's the first floor that housing exists. Yes.
Exactly. And that's a real horrible problem for us right now. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing your experience with us. That was really interesting. And so now I'm going to move to Derek and let him talk more about himself and his disability and how he is preparing for disasters and evacuation.
Hello, thank you. I'm wearing sunglasses because I'm blind, and I've used guide dogs for about 13 years. One more thing, if you could not chat while I'm speaking, because what it does is interfere with my screen reader. Every time a chat goes through, my screen reader will read it aloud to me, and so I can't. The overlap is pretty tough. Thank you. Um, so I live next to a mountain full of trees, and it's an extreme fire risk area. I work at UC Berkeley, and there's the Hayward Fault that runs right through Memorial Stadium. So emergency preparedness is really important to me. Um, uh, the first thing I want to say is people, the way that you can prepare is think about what happens in your neighborhood. Are there fires, earthquakes, floods, tornadoes? We even had a tsunami warning in December, and that was quite interesting. Didn't ever expected to hear that. But how can you best prepare yourself when you have a service animal? Um, First, it's getting notifications. Second, having a plan. And then I call it ready, set, go bag. When you think about notifications, understand that early warning systems can save lives, whether they be notifications through the city, the county, or the state. Um, when the tsunami warning came, I received the warning on my telephone, and that was great. That's one way that you can receive notifications. You can visit the county websites that exist. You can get notice from emails or text messages. And even where I live, there's also a warning siren they test every Wednesday. So how do you plan for evacuation when you have a service animal? First, you need to know that service animals and their handlers both get evacuated. If you have a service animal and people think it's a pet, be mindful of the fact that that might happen and be prepared with whatever you need to say to confirm to first responders that it is not the animal is not a pet. Um, Second, have a go bag ready. It decreases a great deal of stress when you have your go bag ready near the front door and prepared, and you've thought about it ahead of time. Um, Third, know your exit route and also have a backup exit route. Where I live, the emergency exit route is kind of interesting. It's a wooded area, so there's a big concrete canal that goes in the path of travel after you exit the building goes alongside parallel to that canal. So when I had the trainers come out and we practiced going down the route, I didn't realize that. And and they didn't tell me. And so she kept pushing me to the side. And I'm like, well, why do you keep pushing me to the left? And so she said, take your cane out. I took my cane out, and there's a drop off of maybe 3 feet. That was kind of scary to recognize. So we practiced going down that route multiple times so that my dog was clear about what we were trying to do. And I was clear about, now I need to have a backpack on and have my cane out so that I don't fall into that canal. But as far as an evacuation route, that was the only evacuation route that I'm able to use if I have to exit that building. I live on the 3rd floor, so one of the first things that I did was I needed to get my service animal familiar with that exit route, so I used part of it as a relieving area. So every day we're climbing up and down those stairs so that I know how many steps I'm walking, because in case I have to do it really fast, and he's comfortable with that route. And he's also comfortable with how to guide me all the way down past the canal and over to the parking lot. So it's important to have that exit route and then also have a backup exit route in case you need to have that. As far as you need to know who you can call if you need backup or support from people. I have people that we share numbers in the building that I'm in, and it's just ideal to have that already established ahead of time so that you're sharing telephone numbers. Because we're in such a extreme fire risk area, that was one of the first things that we talked about when we met with our neighbors after we moved in. When it comes down to going into a shelter, there was a question about service animals in shelters earlier. And yes, I will take my dog, can go anywhere that I can go. I don't need to take my dog into an operating room, right? That's not really reasonable. But on an airplane, in every place that I go, my service animal is allowed to go with me. And so that would include into a shelter. Now, clearly one of the challenges is transportation when you're blind. And I can evacuate to the parking lot, but then where am I going to go if there's nobody there who can transport me or evacuate me in a vehicle? And where I live is kind of a cove area, so it really would be challenging. So I've got to think about that ahead of time and have backup people available in case I do need to get in someone's car. They need to have met my dog and be comfortable with my dog, etc. So now ready, set, go bag. What should be in the go bag? I said earlier, I like to use a backpack because I need my hand to hold the harness and I might have to use my cane. Normally I don't use my cane when I'm working with my dog because my dog is, he's a veteran, he's really good at his job, exceptional at his job. And, but if case I had to evacuate, I have to take my cane too because my dog might get hurt or I might get separated from my dog. So I always have to have a cane in my bag just in case, that's already ready to go. And also the backpack helps free up my hands. Food and water. My dog's a 75-pound dog, so he's eating 2 cups of food a day and about a half a gallon of water a day. So, it's challenging in that go bag to have 14 bottles of water, right? And food, but nevertheless, those are the most important things for the care of my guide dog. Collapsible bowl. I have 3 or 4 collapsible bowls. I take them when I travel and they're a wonderful resource, but getting a collapsible bowl is it's a phenomenal resource. I don't necessarily have to have veterinarian information because he's from Guide Dogs for the Blind and they have all of his allergy and all of that medical information. But if your dog or your service animal needs medication, that needs to be in that go bag along with your own medication for your own go bag. And so any veterinary records that you may need, you want to also have in that go bag. Having a printout of your emergency contacts is also very helpful so that, you can show sighted people. If you lose your phone, you might have to evacuate and you can't take your phone. But if you have these emergency contacts in your bag, in your go bag, then you're ready and you're able to share that. Taking a photo of yourself and your service animal, that can be done and stored on a phone in case you get separated from your service animal in a shelter or en route to a shelter or when you're being evacuated for whatever reason. Even going as far as having a list of action words that you share to communicate with your dog. So, every people who have a service animal, when they train them to relieve, they might use a particular word or phrase to keep that dog comfortable. And so having a list of what those action words is also helpful. It also is helpful to tell people, what do you want people to know about your service animal, if anything? For mine, I don't have to tell people hardly anything. He's an incredible service animal, never had any issues with his conduct, his behavior, but that might not be the same way for everyone. So if there's certain things that you want first responders or other people to know about your service animal, in case you get separated, then it's good for you to have that information available to share with them. I think I always keep an extra leash and collar, just in case, because they can break, anything can happen. And I mean, there's nothing, it's like the harness. With my harness, I don't have an extra harness, but I always have an extra leash and a collar available. As well as plenty of dog bags, plenty of poop bags, so to speak. I have a little pouch that I bought to put onto my harness so that I can store poop bags and antibacterial ointment in there when I go through airports in case he has an accident, which he normally never does, but it's better to be prepared. And so having poop bags available and those things available is also very helpful. I think that it's critical to have the dog microchipped, the service animal microchipped. The guide dog that I have, they're all already microchipped, but that's another way in case you get separated, a handler gets separated from their dog, that they can use to locate your dog. For me, the critical piece is the practice. So going up and down those stairs with my dog, going and walking that evacuation route. My route's a little bit tricky because there's a stairwell that's about 300 feet away, and the only tag on it is a rail. That's it, and it's very steep. And so I had to food train my dog to go to that rail multiple times. Now, my dog is really, really smart, like I said, and a veteran, but you've got to, and he will remember routes better than I do sometimes. But you've got to make sure that that route is ingrained in their heads with food reward. For me, I use food reward. And so we practice going down to that exit route all the time. When it comes down to the university, when I'm at work, it's all about, we have a system by which anybody with a disability can fill out a Google form sent to our office, Disability Access and Compliance. And we will go about arranging for them to have an evacuation plan, whether that's evacuation from their classes, or evacuation from where they're living, and even go as so far as to provide information in a Knox box so that first responders can know where the person is on what floor they work on. I work on the third floor in that building also, so I make sure that they understand exactly where I am. And that means following up if you change jobs or move to another building or another office, and following up and notifying people, yeah, I'm now over in this location. And so anybody on the campus can ask for an evacuation plan, and everybody who has an email gets automatically enrolled in our Warn Me system in case there is power outages or crimes that take place or any kind of an emergency or things need to be evacuated. So for me, the most critical piece is me trying to be as calm as I can in case of an emergency, so that because my dog's going to pick up my emotions too. But having that go bag ready decreases the stress, and it definitely helps to be prepared. One more thing is when it comes down to the food, dog food does not stay for a year. So you've got to switch it out every now and then, which I didn't really know, but so I fill up his dog food in my go bag, and then I switch it out after about a month, and that way it always will stay fresh. So yeah, that's my presentation.
Great, Derek. Thank you so much. And so this is Jan speaking. I have a few questions for you. So for your dog's backpack, do you carry that, or does your dog carry the backpack?
I carry the backpack with the food and all the other items, and he just has a pouch where I keep the bags, the small bags to pick up his when he relieves. But the backpack I carry on my back.
Okay, so you carry your own backpack, your own go bag, as well as your dog's go bag.
Yeah, I'm loaded up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you have to be. And that's why that water is the most critical thing, as a little bit more than the food. But the water is heavy. And so it does, that's why for me, I have to practice, because I might have to carry something else along with it, depending on where I am. But I have them both at work, in my office, and at home.
Okay. No, that's really good. That's great to know. Let's see. I thought I saw, and thank you people for not posting in the chat while Derek was presenting. We do appreciate that. It seemed like somebody had raised their hand, but I don't know if I'm able to see that person right now. So if you do have a question and you need to raise your hand, or you want to post something in the chat. Oh, it looks like Cindy does have a question. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, thanks. So Derek, does your dog have a bad or otherwise reaction to flames or fire? Yeah, I had a service dog at one point, and he had a bad reaction to candles that were lit. He
Oh,
started
wow.
bark. He started barking at them. So I just
Wow.
wondered if your dog had a similar reaction. Thank you.
No, I haven't come across anything like that so far. Sorry, I haven't come across anything like that so far. My biggest concern was sometimes the cars will backfire, and the really loud noises. But one of the things that disqualifies these dogs from being service animals is if they respond to those kind of noises and get shaken by it. And gratefully, we've never really had any issues with anything like that. I've taught him to relieve in the city on concrete instead of grass, because I'll never know where I'm going to be. And so a big garbage truck drives by, he's still able to focus on doing his business. And we've never had any issues.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Yeah, it's such valuable information. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself now. This is Jan speaking again, and what I've thought about in terms of evacuation and emergency preparedness for me. So I was born missing all four of my limbs, and I use a power wheelchair for mobility that I drive with my left shoulder. And I actually live and work because we work from home now at the Pacific ADA Center, and we have done that since COVID. I live and work in a condo that my husband and I own in Berkeley, and it's part of the duplex. So there's two units. There's our neighbor's unit and then our unit, and we live in the back. And we were able to make our unit accessible pretty easily. We were able to put a ramp in, and then I can come in. There's a deck off the back door, and that's my entrance that I come in. The other entrance, the front door, actually has 3 steps to it, but I don't come in and out that way. And nobody knows that anybody with a disability lives in my unit, because my ramp is down a sidewalk behind a fence and a gate. So no one even knows that somebody with a disability lives there. And the gate is on double swing hinges so that I can push it with my wheelchair. I can push it open either direction that I'm going, whether I'm coming home or leaving my home. Um, I'm fortunate to have my own van with a ramp, but I do not drive it. So one of the things that I have to think about is if my husband is home, he can drive it and we could evacuate together if we needed to evacuate. If he was not home and he could not get to me, how do I do that? How do I get out and be able to get transportation, like Cindy was referring to earlier, with her power chair, of being able to get out and get transportation to where she would need to go if she were forced to evacuate. And so, what I really have not done but need to do is to practice with, I do have 2 attendants, and I need to practice with them. And hopefully one of the 2 would be available to be able to give me a ride out of the area, or one of my neighbors would be able to drive the van and evacuate me from the area if my husband, again, were not around or not able to get to me. I have made really good relationships with all of my neighbors, so I basically know everybody in the neighborhood, and that's really helpful from the standpoint of just general neighborhood safety, of knowing everybody, and but also knowing that you have good relationships so that they will help you when you need them. And I have certainly had to call on them for a variety of reasons over the years. So one of the things will be kind of planning, how would I evacuate if I need to? So for the go bag, like folks mentioned, I got an idea from Cindy about having things on a flash drive, not only taking pictures of your of your condo and your furniture that might need replacement by insurance, but also taking pictures of your important documents that are only available in print form. A lot of us have documents these days. If we have an insurance policy, there's an online, version of it, or we have our banking online. So a lot of our lives are online now, but in case there are things that are not online, we need to make sure that we have pictures of those and documents on that flash drive in case we have to take that with us. So that's one thing that definitely I'm going to add to my go bag. But the other thing is, of course, some food and water. And yeah, a small radio, hopefully a hand crank radio, backup batteries for my phone and tablet, for both my husband's and my phones and our tablets. So we have those batteries charging and plugged in and available to us. And medication, again, that's something like Derek mentioned, of changing out his dog's food to make sure that it's fresh. You need to change out your medication as well in your go bag if you have any medicine, because it will expire as well. So you need to make sure that you're constantly taking the medication that's in your go bag and replacing it with more fresh, more current medication. And then, of course, mentioning things like a flashlight is also really important. First aid kit, a blanket that you might have, to cover yourself if that's necessary. If you have to evacuate without a coat, for example, being able to have something to keep yourself warm if it's in, the cold season. Hopefully a rain poncho as well to have in there, because that will fold up nice and small and it's light, and you may not be able to grab a raincoat before you have to leave. So having that available. I also I have a wheelchair controller that is vertical. It's upright because of how I drive my wheelchair with my shoulder. And so the rain could actually go in the top of the controller through where you plug the charger into if I'm out in a rainstorm. So I have a very scientific thing where I put a baggie over the top of my wheelchair controller to make sure that it is protected from the rain. So I would have extra baggies in my go bag, also to protect my controller from any water that might be getting in. I would say, let's see, what else would be in my go bag? Yeah, protein bars, other kinds of things that you might need for a snack before you could actually, get some food. And yeah, and a list of people, a list of my emergency contacts. That's also a great idea that Derek shared. A list of my attendants, with their permission, of course, how to contact them. My husband's contact information, which is also already in my phone as someone to contact in case of emergency, but I may not be able to grab my phone in time. So being able to have, that available as my emergency contacts is also really important. And have pictures, that show, oh, what do my attendants look like? What does my husband look like? In case we're separated and people can help us find each other. So all of those things are just, really super important. So my evacuation plan, because I work from home, is both a work and employment evacuation plan as well as a personal evacuation plan, that I have to think about, because I'm basically here almost all the time. I'm basically at my home. And so, with all the considerations I need to have are for, evacuating from the house and having my emergency supplies, including some supplies that maybe I don't need to evacuate the home, but maybe I need to stay in the home for a while, maybe shelter in place in the event of an earthquake and the home is not so damaged that would require me to leave it. But if I can stay here and shelter in place, I can make sure that I have, the food and water that I would need to be able to shelter, and hopefully like a backup battery for the refrigerator, and propane to be able to use the barbecue to cook something, in case we don't have gas or electricity. So all of those things, as far as sheltering in place, can also be important thing to think about, because you may be evacuated, but you may not be. You may be able just to shelter in place. And for those of us with disabilities, having things in our own home, having our durable medical equipment, having all of those pieces together is really, really important for us. So let's see. I see some different chats. A whistle or some device to alert rescuers where you are. That's a good point, a good possibility. And toilet paper and sandwich bags for excrement for the service animal. We were told that the water in your water heater can be a useful tool if you have a standalone water heater. We don't have a standalone water heater anymore, because we came home from vacation one time and it was starting to leak all over the floor.
Wow.
And fortunately, we caught it before the whole thing leaked out. But we now have an external water heater that is on the outside of our house, and so it doesn't actually have water. It's like an on-demand type of water heater, and so we don't have any water in our water heater anymore. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, and keep in mind, folks, that not only do you need to refresh your own food, your service animal food, your medications, but you also need to refresh water. Water is not necessarily good forever either. And you need to make sure that you're changing out the water and refreshing the water as well, whether you're going to stay shelter in place or whether you're going to have to evacuate somewhere. So making sure that you're refreshing your water as well. And yes, I like the whistle idea. I actually have a whistle attached to my keys that I can get to in the little backpack behind my chair. And so, as well as a little flashlight so that I could, flash SOS if I needed to, something like that, if anybody knows Morse code. So being able to use those to have people be able to locate you, yes, can be very, very important. Glow sticks, another person says, is having glow sticks. Yeah, I don't know whether I could actually open a glow stick and make it work, but it would be a good thing for people who can do that to have a glow stick, or if your attendant can do that, that's also a good thing.
Hey, Jen, I want to also mention I forgot booties to protect the service animal's feet, because there could be glass broken. It could be the middle of winter. So also having the shoes to be able to put onto the service animal.
Oh, that's a great point. Yes, it could also be the ground could be hot
Yes.
from a fire or even just a heat wave.
Mhm.
And yeah, you need to make sure that you have booties. So that's a great point as well. Having that, yes. Yes. So, do you have rain gear for your dog, or?
Yes, I do. I
Okay.
do. I have 2 coats for him um, that cover him very well.
Okay, so that's good. Making sure your service animal stays warm and dry is also, because if they're not comfortable, I mean, they're trained to work under hardship conditions, but you want to keep them as comfortable as you can, right, to make sure that they're working well.
Yes, my Labrador is a water dog, but he doesn't like water. So I have to keep him. He didn't get the memo, so I have to keep him dry.
Yeah, right. The water dog with that doesn't like water. That's a good one. That's a great one. So, do folks have any other suggestions, questions, or comments for Derek, Cindy, or myself?
I do believe we have some hands raised.
Oh, yes.
Sharon, do you have a question?
And are people able to unmute themselves?
Yes. Sharon, if you want to ask your question, you may now, if you can unmute yourself. Okay, Paula, perhaps?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, because I can't unmute myself, but I had a couple suggestions, one for Cindy. She said something about if she wasn't able to get her electric wheelchair out of the building, and they had her in the sling taking her down, it might be a good idea to have like just a manual wheelchair. Maybe one of your aides or somebody could, keep it at their house or something. And in the case you have to evacuate without your chair, at least, you could have that chair to get in and to move around and to get to where you need to go.
Yeah, you're
There's
right.
own closets and things like that, so you wouldn't really have to buy one. You could get a used one or something like that. So, and the other thing was for Derek, carrying the water for the dog.
Mhm.
Now, normally when you get to a shelter, the one thing that they pretty much have right away is water. So to make your backpack a little bit lighter,
Yeah.
you can maybe not have to carry so much water if you're evacuating to a shelter, because they should have some when you get there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you also for the suggestion.
Very well.
Yeah, and I think Cindy and I, this is Jan speaking, had talked about the manual wheelchair suggestion, but Cindy would also need a really good cushion for that manual wheelchair because she can't just kind of sit in any wheelchair. It will be damaging, right, Cindy?
Yes. It'd be
Right.
very
Yeah.
damaging to my skin, yeah. So I'll have to look into that as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. And then Sharon, are you able to unmute yet or? Okay.
Okay, we have another
Sorry.
question from Matthew.
So, I'm Matthew. I'm a certified qualified mental health associate out of Jackson County, Oregon. I work with 18 of our mental health foster homes. We did a training last year on disaster preparedness, emergency planning. And as I was looking for videos to try to make that impact, I came across the East Palestine derailment. And we are in a railroad zone on the I-5 corridor. And it really hit that it's not so much what are the things that we would expect to be our tragedies, but how close are you to a railroad? If there was a derailment and not knowing what those cars are holding, just kind of surveying your landscape. And so that was such a remarkable thing that we kind of learned and discussed with our foster homes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, because all of us presumably, or most of us are going to be near railroad tracks, even if we are in rural areas, whether we're in rural or urban areas. And, that could have poisonous things that the railroad is carrying, that the train is carrying. So absolutely. And then the other thing that when you were speaking that it raised for me is that, mental health is so important as well. Cindy, Derek, and I all have physical disabilities, but the truth is there's a lot of folks that have mental health disabilities that are neurodiverse or otherwise have, disabilities, and disasters are extremely stressful situations, whether you are able to shelter in place or if you have to evacuate and go to a shelter, that's an extremely stressful situation. So make sure that you're also trying your best to take care of your mental health and make a plan for your mental health, just like having your go bag for your physical needs. Make your mental health go bag in a way. And what are you going to do to try to reduce your stress and keep yourself, as calm as possible during this disaster, because you will make better decisions, and it will be a generally a better experience for you if you can stay as calm as possible and as low stress as possible.
Paula also has a hand raised.
Yeah, so I'm a former Red Cross employee, and I know in Red Cross shelters for the larger disasters that we have disaster mental health people available. So if somebody has an issue, you can always go to, one of the Red Cross shelters, or if you're in the shelter, seek out the disaster mental health folks.
Yeah, great point, Paula. And also making sure that you have effective communication for people who are deaf and use sign language interpreters, or people that might need to caption. You might need to text back and forth with somebody who doesn't use sign language interpreters. But having sign language interpreters available either through video remote interpreting or in person is also going to be critical. And for Cindy and myself, at least, having our significant other or our attendants be able to help us in the shelter, because we are not able to take care of our own personal needs, going to the bathroom, showering, being able to get food, all of that we would need assistance with. So we need to make sure, and shelters need to make sure, that they are allowing people's family members and attendants to be able to come and hopefully stay also at the shelter, but at least assist people who need that assistance. So shelter folks, don't just think about the physical aspects and physical accessibility of the shelter. That is important, but also think about the other needs that people may have that are staying there. Okay, anyone else?
We do have a question from Dr. Gershon. She's going to come over and ask.
Great.
All the way on the other side of the room. Paul, I have a quick question for you. It's something I've thought about a lot. In the Red Cross or any shelter, do they typically stockpile very common medications such as insulin or, say, statin, or actually even certain baby formula? Do you know that?
I'm sorry. Are you asking me, or are you asking the person who just asked the question? Who
Paula.
Is former Red
I'm
Cross?
asking Paula from the Red Cross.
Okay.
As far as meds, no. But we have disaster health people, nurses in the shelters. So what we typically do is write or add on to their card money to go to a pharmacy that's still up and running and get the medication that they need if they weren't able to evacuate with their medication.
Yeah, that's a great question, Robin. This is Jan speaking. And my husband actually is an adult onset type 1 diabetic. So he has to have insulin in his go bag, which once you take it out of the refrigerator and open it, it only lasts a certain amount of time. I mean, it lasts a good amount of time, but he also has to have supplies for his insulin pump because he uses an insulin pump. So every 3 days, he has to change his pump site. And every 10 days, he has to change the sensor that he uses to communicate between his pump and his phone. So that tells him where his blood sugar is at any moment in time. So he would need to have all of those things in his go bag as well.
I'm really thinking more and more about the kind of, maybe not acute medical needs, but kind of chronic. For instance, I always need EpiPen with me because I have a very bad set of allergies and for airplanes or whatever. But as people were speaking here, I was thinking, I don't have that in my go bag. And that's because it does outdate. And I keep it around. I usually keep it in my book bag, but keeping it in a go bag when I might not use it. And it's hard to get a second set. You know, I only get the one refill and I think it's every 6 or 9 months. But I have to rethink that because these suggestions here are really important. It could be the difference between life and death.
Yeah, absolutely. And just revisiting your go bag every month and seeing what's in it and seeing if things are expired and how do you need to swap things out. I think that's sort of a good best practice if you can swap it out. An EpiPen, I would think, would be something that would be relatively readily available, you know, through pharmacies in the event of a disaster. But if you needed it immediately, you need to have it with you. And also so that's a great point. And somebody was also talking about having cash. Yes, having as much cash as you can, you know, in a protected bag inside of your go bag, because you may not be able to use ATMs or, you know, other kinds of cash machines. So hopefully most people are taking plastic these days or other forms of payment, but you may need to have some cash on you in case you need that. So that's also a good point. Yes.
That is a great point, and it's something I do now. Actually, I carry a daily go bag because sometimes on the New York City subways, they break down, they stop. You may be stranded for an extended period, or you might wind up in a part of the city you don't know at all. But I do always carry, I hope nobody's listening here who might be robbing me on a New York City subway, but I do carry a little bit of cash. It's just a little bit in a Ziploc baggie, and I carry it every time in my daily go bag. But I put water in there. I put my EpiPen. I put essentials because I might get stranded, and I know people who have on subways for extended periods of time. So these comments are just phenomenal. I want you to know we've learned so much from you. I see Paula has a hand raised. I'm going to ask Jamie, can let Paula come in and then we'll have some closing comments, and maybe Jerry, you want to come back up here and we'll just have some closing comments and let people get out a little bit early.
Yeah,
People
Paula.
who are here in the room, please help yourself to the donuts.
Paula, if you wanted to continue, talking is permitted for you.
Okay, so as far as the EpiPen, she carries the EpiPen with her anyway and has it, I'm assuming, all the time with her. So wouldn't really need to put it in the go bag because she would have it with her anyway. So, you know, you would just switch it out as it becomes expired as you normally would. So just a suggestion.
Okay, great.
Carol,
And
if you wanted to ask your question.
My name is Carol. I'm calling from New Hampshire. I'm a public health emergency planner for the last 20 years. I've worked hand in hand very closely with the Red Cross and other organizations in disasters. Thank you for this panel. It's been very informative. I've learned a lot from all of you, so many, many thanks. A couple things I just wanted to offer as a suggestion. When you have like your own money with you or your identification, sometimes it's good if you have it on your body. So for example, if you have like a passport holder that you can put around your neck and underneath your shirt, that way you'll have that available should somebody decide they want to take your bag and run off and leave you without those essential pieces of information. So sometimes just you know, putting it on your body yourself, in your pocket, in your shoe, in your bra, in your panties, whatever is going to be efficient and work for you might be an option. As to other needs, when you show up at a shelter, I've done a considerable amount of responses in my state here in New Hampshire during the winter storms. And a lot of individuals with disabilities would often say, "You don't know how to take care of me when I come to your shelter." That was 20 years ago. We've certainly come a long way working with the Red Cross, and I can tell you that we've adopted June, Isis, and Kale's Sea Mist as a way of identifying what additional needs a person might have, whether it's communication, maintaining health, independence, self-sufficiency, support, safety, and transportation. And you know, I just wanted to express to folks that many shelters now across the nation are utilizing that, not just the Red Cross, but also locally managed, either through Medical Reserve Corps or community emergency response teams. They are adopting that. And I want folks to know that we will do the best we can to meet your needs when you do come to the shelter. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and have a good day.
Thank you, Carol. And I just wanted to give a shout out to June Isaacson Kales as well. She is an amazing colleague that we know well at the Pacific ADA Center. And if you'll notice, she just mentioned all of the CMIST, what it stands for, you know, communication, maintaining health, all of those. We've mentioned all of that actually during our presentation today, even transportation, without even necessarily knowing that we were going through the CMIST framework. But that's why it's such a great framework, is because it applies across the board to any disaster that you might have, and for people with disabilities. So a shout out to June for putting that framework together that is so applicable, you know, always and nationwide as well. So thank you for raising June's name as well.
And we're going to close it out, but we just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you to NYU for putting this event together. Dr. Gershon and the students, this has been great. Obviously, folks have had a lot of questions and engagement, so that's been really great. I do encourage you to get connected to your ADA center. And then also, if you want to get connected to ours as well, that's great, because we're going to be putting out more and more about emergency preparedness as we go through these findings. So I'm going to leave it to you to close us out.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much, Jerry. And thanks to all of you. Special thanks to our wonderful panelists. I wish we were closer by and love to see you in person, and it's been too long. And we may be across the country, but I feel like you're right here in the room with us. And I look forward to the next time that we can be in person. Definitely, Derek, Cindy, thank you so much. And thank you so much to our wonderful interpreters, Dee and Gage. We appreciate it so much. And to all of you for taking time out of your busy day. We will definitely be in touch. We hope that you can go ahead and email us. I believe you have all the contact info, both for Jerry and the group here at NYU. Special thanks to Alexis Merchanoff, our wonderful speaker, Jerry, Jan, for being a wonderful panel leader, and to all of you for joining us today. We wish you the very best, and safe always. Stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.